All right, we are going to be doing Christianity and science. Before I even start, let me recommend to you two books. First one is called Not a Chance by R.C. Sproul and Keith Matheson. Awesome book, very good. And the second one is called A Shot of Faith to the Head by Mitch Stokes, which, I mean, a book named A Shot, that's gold. That's a great name. It says, be a confident believer in the age of cranky atheists. So that is sort of that's the subtitle. Not a Chance subtitle is God, Science, and the Revolt Against Reason. We're going to talk a little bit about that, but I guess black and yellow is the color to pick for that sort of apologetic thing. But if you are interested in those, come take a look. I would recommend both highly. I don't know if I'd say I agree with every single thing in there, but I probably do. I'm probably pretty close. I don't remember, honestly. All right, so there's no doubt, and I got to apologize. This I don't know if doing a little physical activity is going to help you focus, or if a belly full of food is going to make it harder. But we're gonna go to work on this one, and it might take a little long, and that's fine for me. I hope it's fine for you. I don't know, but I'm going to challenge you a bit here. So let's get a deep seat in the saddle. There is no doubt that the frequent citation for many leaving the faith is because they can't reconcile science with the claims of the Christian faith. And I was a little surprised that it didn't get brought up more in the interviews. But I think broadly speaking, it's very, very true. We obviously don't have time to look into all of those claims, but we can look at the principle of science itself. That's primarily what we're going to be doing. Though I will say, addressing some of the actual claims of modern science, it's going to be inevitable. So I'll start by asking, what is science? And I must admit, if there is one buzzword that I am so profoundly sick of hearing, it is science. The way that word is utilized and thrown around to virtue signal, to display one's superior intellect, to justify anybody, their actions or their positions. Trust the science. It's science. It grates on me. It just drives me crazy. It is too often used as a crutch to give weight to statements or to positions or actions that are otherwise unjustified. You just say, well, it's science, and it's like, oh, well, then it must be fine. Drives me nuts. But that doesn't change what science actually is. The misuse of the term and the idea doesn't change what it actually is. Science is a way of knowing about the natural world by observing causes and effects. And I'm sure there's other definitions, but that's a basic definition that we'll work on. Way of knowing about the natural world by observing natural causes and effects. Oh, I forgot to zoom in the camera for the live stream as well. It's a private live stream, but I'll note here as well, using that definition, this is something that we as humans can't not do. We all naturally act scientifically. We all observe cause and effect and act accordingly and adjust accordingly. Think about a child that develops motor skills as he literally learns the laws, natural laws, physical laws, laws of nature, as he learns these laws just by interacting with the natural world, right? And observing the effects of things that he causes. He learns if you push your cup over the side of the counter, it's going to fall and spill. He learns that. How a ball bounces. They develop these motor skills, and they're adjusting how they physically interact with the world based on their observations. That's literally the process of science. They change their actions based on those observations. They re-engage then with the natural world, and the process is just continually. That's how humans are. We were designed that way, to learn that way, to develop that way. A child doesn't consciously get what they're doing necessarily, and they don't do it perfectly, obviously, but they're, in a way, very much using the scientific method. So science is, in that sense, it's a process or an observation to gather knowledge and learn. But the word's kind of also used to refer to a body of knowledge. So somebody might refer to science as a body of knowledge, some of which is historical. Some of that historical knowledge was not necessarily obtained through the scientific process, but is instead theorized using educated assumptions. Because nobody was there to examine what was happening. They can't observe and use the scientific process, so they have to see how things are now and make assumptions to say it would happen this way then, that sort of thing. They create historical knowledge or a body of knowledge that they call science, even though the process of science wasn't able to take place in that time and place. So just be aware that the term science can be used in different ways. And that can lead to some misunderstandings. And I'm even going to use the word in both senses during this, but I'm hoping you should be able to discern from the context which one I mean each time I use it. I think if it's unclear, I'll try and clarify. But I would also add that the debate involving science is not about the process of science. It's not about that operation of science. Like I said, that's natural. It's inevitable. We all agree that's what you do. There's no debate there. And even a good portion of the historical knowledge, if you just look at the body of what we know based on what we've observed, a good portion of that scientific data is agreed upon as being correct, as having even the things that were once believed, we acknowledge, well, that's what they thought was true then, and then it's universally recognized as false now. So even those sort of things are generally, for the most part, agreed upon. The debate lies in scientific conclusions and theories, both involving things being researched now. There's debate there, right? Things researched and trying to figure some stuff out. But also when they use assumptions to extrapolate data back onto the past. They don't have data there. They have a data set here, and extrapolating is saying, well, we're seeing this data here, we think it was this way here. That's basically what extrapolation means. You don't have data, but you're using other data to get to conclusions where you don't have data. And those debates are not all drawn along religious and scientific lines. It's not that simple. But the assumptions involved in certain debates, involve fundamentally different worldviews. That part is inevitably, that part's true. There's fundamentally different worldviews that are involved in some of these debates. And some of those will indeed correspond to differences in a supernatural versus a materialistic perspective. That's going to be where the debate lies. So I would say it this way. There's one kind of science that involves debates, that being science in the sense of a body of knowledge. There's no debate on how science is kind of done, this process of operating, generally speaking. But this body of knowledge idea, there is debate there. And one fraction of even those debates involve claims about the past. You know, it's not stuff they're currently figuring out about how things work now. There's debates about what things were like in the past. And one fraction of those debates are because of differing worldviews that correspond to Christian beliefs versus naturalistic, materialistic beliefs. Generally, in a naturalistic, materialistic world, and the idea of that is there's all that exists is what you physically exist, matter, energy. And if it's not matter or energy, it isn't. It is not. It does not exist in any sense. But generally, they believe in what's called uniformitarianism, the idea that the way things are now is the way that they've always been, and that's why you can extrapolate data backwards onto the past because, well, it operates the same way then as it does now. It's just an assumption, right? And we, in the supernatural worldview, would believe in catastrophism. Catastrophes have happened throughout time, and there's major sudden upheavals. For example, the flood is a major sudden upheaval and left a huge body of evidence that we should not look at as being like, well, this happened over a slow process of time, the way things have always been, slowly, gradually. No, we're saying this was a major event that happened. It was a catastrophe, and we shouldn't look at the data set created by a catastrophe and extrapolate that on a uniformitarian worldview. They'll give you false conclusions if you did such things. And likewise, we believe in the supernatural, right? We are supernaturalists. Believers are supernaturalists. If you believe the Bible, you're a supernaturalist. And that's generally what people really mean when they propose an incompatibility between Christianity and science. Because supernaturalism cannot coexist with physical materialistic, naturalistic materialistic worldview. Those two are diametrically opposed. Because a naturalistic materialistic worldview denies the even possibility of the supernatural. So that is a debate. That's what people generally mean. Does the supernatural even exist? Science says no, because they say science is purely naturalistic materialism. They make that assumption. But the existence of those debates does not make Christianity against science. It does not make them incompatible. As Johannes Kepler aptly said, scientific discovery and the ideas of scientific discovery are thinking God's thoughts after him. We're discovering what God has done, and it becomes a body of knowledge that we now know. We're thinking God's thoughts after him. Christianity has never been the enemy of science or learning. It really never has. The rapid development of science in the 17th, 18th, 19th century, the scientific revolution, was mostly driven by Christians. It's a historical fact. And some of them were even clergymen. But eventually, as the scientific revolution developed, some anti-Christian scientists began to use their conclusions to undermine Christianity, and this fake dichotomy between the two started to arise between Christianity and science. It was not the church or Christians going after science. It was rather a portion of scientists going after the Christian faith. Historically, that's what actually happened. Now, I'm not going to stand here and say, well, all current conclusions of modern science, that all comports with Scripture. No, it doesn't. They don't. There is an incompatibility. There's no denying that modern claims, supposedly based on science, do contradict the Bible. And if those modern claims are true, then the Bible is false. But if the Bible is true, those claims are false. One of them has to be wrong. But does a rejection of some of the current claims, supposedly based on science, does a rejection of those claims mean we as Christians are rejecting science itself? No, of course not. Of course not. That goes for both now as well as in the past, when the current claims at those times were being challenged. There were claims in the past that they said were being true, and those claims were challenged. It wasn't Christianity being against science. Claims of historical conflicts are actually exaggerated, or at least mischaracterized. It was often forces within the church fighting amongst themselves, trying to figure things out. This misunderstanding is similar to, the popular notion, everybody in the Middle Ages thought the earth was flat. No, they didn't. It's a complete mischaracterization when people pretend like that was the case. They did not. They largely understood by that time the earth was not flat. That kind of assertion is meant to make it look like, well, in those times when the church was dominant, it was the Dark Ages that kept everybody in ignorance. They hated science and learning. They were scared of it. No, this is false. It's just a fake history. When it comes to some of the historical conflicts, the reality is the church was, for centuries, the primary supporter of astronomical research. The church was making that happen. They were paying scientists to do that, sponsoring them, patronizing them. Like I said, they were never against science or learning. The church was never against science or learning. And sometimes conflicting theories within the church cause scientific conflict. Sort of like today, there's scientific conflict on certain theories, right? Well, that happened in the church when they did astronomical research. Every prevailing notion at some point has to unseat a previous prevailing notion, right? New theories replace old theories. As you learn more, as you get a bigger data set, as technology improves to dive deeper into the data, to produce data. And sometimes there's other factors driving science to certain conclusions. There really are. Even in the midst of the scientific revolution, there were a plurality of scientific theories that arose to explain the superiority of the white race. It was in the midst of the scientific revolution. They were saying, well, this is why the white race is the most superior. And the other races have lower intelligence, and there were claims that other races were literally less human, even non-human, denied the actual humanity of other races. And there were motives other than the data that they were looking at to get them to those conclusions, right? There's nothing in the data that could justify that. But they were a little bit motivated by other things. And you'll know what I mean if you've ever heard of the phrenology. I don't know if anybody's heard of that. It's a now debunked pseudoscience, which involved detailing the study of the shape and the size of the cranium and certain parts of the cranium. And this was supposedly an indication of character and mental abilities, like, oh, this guy's got a bigger medulla oblongata, he must be super smart, or something like that. That sort of idea. And they literally would measure it and try and compare it, and they would justify this sort of thing. There are times in just our recent history when trusting the claims of modern science would make somebody a literal racist. and a fool, honestly. They believed foolish things by trusting modern science, settled claims of modern science, right? Meaning no matter how they felt about another race, even if they weren't negative towards them, they would be like, well, science says they're less human, they're less intelligent, they're not a human at all. So they thought of them that way by default of accepting these scientific claims that they were less human, less intelligent than other races. And yes, all of that is tied to Darwinian evolutionary theory. That's where it came from. You can, people don't like the fact that it's tied together, but it is. It's inevitable. You have to accept that historical fact. The full title of Darwin's book, On the Origin of Species, By the Means of Natural Selection, or The Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. And people took that and well, this means, the white people are superior. They've evolved the farthest. They're the most human. And you could justify it with Darwinian evolution. So scientific debate has always occurred. It's part of the scientific process. It's part of just our recent past. We're not beyond it. Modern settled science still believes very stupid things. Don't just take the claims of historical debates between the church and science for how they're popularly portrayed. Not only is scientific debate normal, it wasn't as simple as, well, it's the church versus science. That's a drastic mischaracterization of how it actually happened. Oh yes, but didn't the church condemn Galileo? Didn't they call Copernicanism heresy? Heliocentrism, didn't they call that heresy? Yes, but it's not that simple. Because who did the church say that to? Other people in the church. Even the Copernican revolution was a debate between the Ptolemaic theory that was geocentric and the Copernican theory that was heliocentric. It was a debate among Christians within the church. And the heliocentric Copernicans were patronized by the church to do that research. And they're like, hey, this is what we're seeing. They're like, no, we don't believe you. We're going to hold to this settled science of Ptolemaic theory. Like, no, that's wrong. No, we don't believe you. So both Copernicus and Galileo were Christians. And they were advocating that the science was not settled and that the modern claims of their day were in fact wrong. Their opponents held to this Ptolemaic geocentric theory based on Aristotelian philosophy. And they scraped a few verses together that they claimed supported their position, but really the debate was largely not even theological. It wasn't like, well, Bible says this, therefore what you see in your telescope is wrong. That's not what happened. Not that people wouldn't abuse that if they could use it to defend their position. But the debate wasn't really theological, hardly at all. It was a debate among scientists within the church, and it turns out modern claims of settled science can be just as silly in the Middle Ages as they can be today. Yes, there were, of course, some authoritarian tactics used to silence the Copernican side, the correct side. They were able to silence them for a time, but eventually the views changed. The data went out. And if you read the details, you'll know it wasn't really just about the science at all. It wasn't like they're debating over data. It was also about politics. It was about the hurt feelings and misunderstandings, even in the stuff that Galileo published and somebody taking offense, like, oh, he's talking about me. He's calling me an idiot. I'm going to silence him. It wasn't because he disagreed with the actual data. It's politics. It's stuff like that. That's part of what happened in these historical debates. So if your problem is some people in the church having too much power, interpreting Scripture poorly, and overstepping their bounds of authority, then great. Yeah, I've got a problem with that too. I'd like to introduce you to a little movement called the Protestant Reformation that tried to pretty much fix that problem. But what you cannot do is use examples such as those to posit a conflict between Christianity and science. It was, in reality, a disagreement between two scientific factions within the Christian community, sometimes miscommunicating with each other. Both theories, Copernicanism, Ptolemaic, both of these theories were using observation to explain the natural world. And they were both able to do it. Both cosmological models could accurately predict much of what could be expected phenomenologically, in the sense that they could explain and predict what you were going to observe or perceive from our perspective on Earth. It's not like the Ptolemaic version prevailed and they're couldn't predict the movement of the stars. They could, They were just wrong about why they were where they were, because their perspective was off. That was it. But they both had, phenomenologically, they're observing and explaining and predicting accurately. Not explaining accurately, but you know what I mean. But of course, Copernicus and Galileo had advanced beyond Ptolemy. They're 1,500 years later at least. So, and the scientific establishment of their day, they got beyond that. They were able to observe more, and they utilized better technology, telescopes, which Ptolemy didn't have, and thus they were able to develop a more accurate model. It was a debate of science against science, an old theory versus a new theory, with the participating scientists all being Bible-believing churchmen. So who won? The church. Who won? Science. They weren't at odds with each other. If we took a survey of historical scientists, and we just asked them, is there a conflict between science and Christianity? There would not be a question. In fact, if you asserted an inherent conflict, I think you'd be laughed out of the room by literally the most brilliant men that have ever lived. Because they were Christians. Men like Francis Bacon, the founder of the scientific method. Francis Bacon. Johannes Kepler discovered the laws of planetary motion. Robert Boyle, you've heard of Boyle's law, he was a chemist, a physicist. Isaac Newton, he might be the most brilliant man of the entire scientific revolution. His accolades and genius are perhaps unsurpassed. Blaise Pascal, Pascal's law. Galileo Galilei, again, a man whose name is synonymous with brilliance. Gottfried Leibniz developed the theory of pre-established harmony. Antony von Leeuwenhoek, no matter how much I hear his name, I can't get it right, he's Dutch. But he's the father of microbiology. Anton Lavoisier, the father of modern chemistry. Carl Linnaeus, the father of modern taxonomy. Michael Faraday, who was primarily in establishing electromagnetic theory, electrolysis. Arthur Compton discovered that light can behave as a particle as well as a wave. You all learned that in 7th grade, right? He was a deacon in a Baptist church. James Clerk Maxwell, electromagnetic theory, Maxwell's equations. Louis Pasteur discovered principles of vaccination, microbiology, microbial fermentation, and pasteurization. It's called pasteurization after Louis Pasteur. George Lemaitre discovered Hubble's law that space and the universe are expanding. Gregor Mendel, founder of the science of genetics. William Gibbs, inventor of vector analysis. I was an engineer at Purdue. We had to do tons of vector analysis. I love it. I hate it. I hate it. Lord Kelvin codified the first and second laws of thermodynamics and deduced the absolute zero. Negative 73.15 degrees Celsius is absolute zero, I believe. Werner Heisenberg, one of the primary creators of quantum mechanics, formulated the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. Samuel Morse, inventor of Morse code, the telegraph. George Washington Carver, Florence Nightingale, Sir Robert Boyd, Leonard Euler, and believe me, that list goes on and on and on. These are the men that drove the scientific revolution. They were Christians that understood operational science is only possible because God created an ordered universe and equipped us to discover its mysteries. We're thinking God's thoughts after him. The entire scientific revolution was founded by Christians, on Christian principles. It's fair to say the Christian faith has done more to advance the cause of science and technology than any other science on earth. Any other system on earth, excuse me. That's a fair statement. However, it's also Christians that understand that Christianity and science are not fundamentally at odds because science is an examination of data exclusively from the material realm. We gave it in our very definition at the beginning. Examining the material realm, the physical realm, making observations in that realm. Christianity is not based exclusively in the material realm. It affirms a supernatural worldview. It involves truth claims both in the material and spiritual world. And we say that the spiritual world has come and interacted with the physical world. And a purely spiritual, non-physical God created the physical world, the material, everything that is material. We don't even claim that every single event that has occurred in time has been purely due to naturalistic processes. So an examination that uses purely naturalistic processes is not going to be able to examine every event in time. Our Creator God has interacted with his creation. And he does so both using natural processes in time to orchestrate history to his desired end, aka providence, But also, he interacts using supernatural processes to counteract or to disregard nature, to orchestrate history to his desired end, aka wonders, miracles. And when God does that, when he acts supernaturally in the physical realm, science is fundamentally incapable of explaining those processes. It can't do it. It's not equipped to. It's not meant to. By its very fundamental tenets, it cannot evaluate those events. Using science to engage with miracles is nonsensical. It's like asking, what does purple smell like? Like, what? It's like asking clouds what they think of the French Revolution. It doesn't make any sense. They're in different worlds, different realms. It doesn't make sense intellectually at all. Science is not able to examine a miracle. Natural physical laws are not capable of disproving a supernatural event. Could a scientist take a sample of the water under the feet of Jesus as he walked on the water? Could it take a sample of that water and put it under a microscope and be like, oh, here's why he's not sinking. The atoms are denser than normal and preventing his, like, why are those atoms denser than normal? Well, the electrolysis from static electricity on his garments must have condensed. What? You can't do it. It doesn't make any sense. He walked on water and he didn't sink, and it wasn't like a scientist could come there and figure that out. Could you take a lab and go and take a sample of the blood in the Nile River during the 10 plagues and be like, well, this is why the river turned the blood? They can't tell us why that happened. Could they give Lazarus an MRI after he comes out of the grave and be like, well, this is why the cells in his body were rejuvenated? No. If a team of scientists were present immediately after the creation of matter, when God speaks matter into existence, could they test it and prove or disprove that God made it? Would there have been something special about the elements and the atoms of early creation that would have provided irrefutable evidence of God's supernatural creation of it? Or would it just look like matter? Where did it come from? Science can't tell you that. It's not meant to. It can't evaluate the supernatural. Of course not. Science can only explain how natural things happen, not supernatural. The apparent conflicts exist not because science disproves the supernatural. It is because of the presuppositions of naturalistic materialists that say that the supernatural does not exist, that it cannot exist. Because according to them, a dead man can't rise from the dead. It can't happen by default. So when we say a dead man rises from the dead, they can't examine data and say, oh, no, he did, or he didn't. All they can say is, that's not possible. Well, according to naturalistic, materialistic worldview, of course it's not. We're not claiming it happened naturally. We're claiming God did it supernaturally. They say dead men don't rise from the dead. They say men can't walk on water. They say miracles aren't real. They say that an immaterial being isn't possible. They don't know how a mind or a being, in essence, can be without physical accompaniment of that. God is immaterial. He's without body parts or passions. He does not have a body. That doesn't work in their worldview. They fundamentally can't do it. So they simply assume those things. And that is the very definition of what science is and isn't. They cannot use it to say anything about the supernatural or miracles based on what it actually is. To know anything about those miracles, to know anything about the spiritual realm, you can only take God at his word. And that's what faith is. Taking God at his word. When he has spoken, you believe it. Faith is not believing without seeing in the sense of believing without evidence. And my people hear me rant on this all the time. It drives me crazy when people are like, well, faith is just believing without any evidence, or contrary to evidence. In the face of evidence to the contrary, you just take it on faith. No, that's not what faith is. Yes, sometimes it's God saying he's going to return, and we don't see it yet. It's unrealized, but we believe him because we believe God, and so we have faith that, yes, he'll do what he said. That's faith. It's believing, taking God at his word. It's trusting. It's placing confidence in someone. And Christians place their faith in God as the sovereign creator of the universe and in Jesus Christ to save us by his work accomplished as a man. Logical and rational thinking confirm what Scripture tells us, though that sort of clear thinking is intentionally suppressed by unbelievers to avoid the necessary conclusions that God is real. And God told us this in Romans 1, because that which is known about God is evident within them. They know it. Evident. Proof. For God made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power, and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. Creation, existence of matter, is enough proof that everyone is without excuse. It's not enough proof to get you to Jesus, but it proves that God is real and ought to be worshiped. But what do they do with what God has revealed in the entire world through nature? What do they do with it? They suppress the truth in unrighteousness, Romans 1 says. Faith is a spiritual issue. It is not merely an intellectual one. We know there's intellect to faith. There's a body of data that we believe, things that we say are true. It's not purely that. The demons believe things are true without having faith. They believe God is real. They know that Jesus is Lord. They know that. But they don't have trust in him and saving him for salvation. Were it not for the Noahic effects of the fall, the corrupting of our mind to be able to think, if it weren't for that, then all men would think clearly, and they would come to the rational, logical conclusion that God is real. Because if you look at creation and you examine what's in front of you, it's like, oh, there's a God. He's powerful. He ought to be worshipped. It's an undeniable fact of creation. Were it not for our sinful natures, we would not be motivated to suppress the truth in unrighteousness. But then, of course, we wouldn't need the work of Christ either. But we're fallen. That's what we do. Suppress the truth in unrighteousness, and we need Christ. The ironic thing about faith is that unbelievers who reject Christianity because they have a misunderstanding of science, let's say, they're still exercising faith. A lot of faith, perhaps more faith than us. They're still believers in something. It's just they're not believing what God has said. They are putting their faith and they're trusting in nameless, faithless scientists and what they've supposedly said. They have to put their faith in them. Because these young people leaving the faith due to science have not read these research papers. They haven't done the lab work. They haven't conducted the experiments. They rarely even understand the processes used to reach the conclusions. They just have confidence, aka faith, that we can believe what those guys said. So they trust the scientists. They put their faith in them. They trust their work, the conclusions that they reach, all without examining much of the hard evidence themselves. They claim to be evidentialists, but they exercise more faith than just about anybody. The difference is that they're naive enough to put their faith in man instead of God. They think everything in the scientific realm is objective. They think that scientists are unbiased, that they're just full of pure motives. They're out of touch with reality, the reality of fallen men. Scientists are fallen men like the rest of us. Scientists are motivated by self-interest like anyone else, by money, by pride, job security, fame, accolades, attention, getting the right grants. They're motivated by peer pressure, by politics, by political correctness. There are certain conclusions that you could draw that you would not publish because if you did, you would lose all money, all your grants, and your job. I promise you. Even the scientists that first discovered soft tissue in dinosaur bones, we were talking about this last night, the first one that found that, and it's happened a ton since then, but the very first one was terrified to publish her data because she was like, oh, they're gonna think that I'm a young earth creationist or something. I'm denying all the prevailing notions of. So they had to come up and formulate some sort of theory as to why this bone didn't calcify over what they thought were millions and millions of years. They have to explain that. But she was terrified to publish that data because what happens to her career? Scientists are motivated by that sort of thing. They're regular human beings like us. It's not as objective as everybody pretends. Their own desires get in the way of what they're willing to say is true. What they want to be true gets in the way of what they're willing to say is true. And from what I've seen, those that have an overconfidence in scientific claims are, generally speaking, this is a general statement, okay, those that have not spent time studying the hard sciences. They haven't spent time in a lab. The people that haven't done that they have an overconfidence in science and scientists. They haven't been in a lab. They haven't seen the flexibility that resides in the operations of science. I remember even in seminary, it was the students with the liberal arts education that hadn't done any hard science work who were the most easily convinced by scientific claims. They had the most faith in scientists. And I studied agriculture and biological engineering at Purdue, and my friend that was with me studied geology. And we were the two that were the least persuaded because we had more experience than the others in those hard sciences and seeing how it's not what you think it is. It's not just A plus B equals C. It's not that simple. We saw firsthand how many assumptions get made and how scientific processes can be directed a little bit toward favored results. I've done it. I've done it running experiments when I worked as an engineer for CAT. And I was motivated by time and not money so much. I just wanted to get home. But I've done it. I've directed things and I justified it with equations and like this. I can make some assumptions here. I've done it. Scientists are men, and too many young people put blind faith in them. I do not have enough faith to be an atheist. I don't. And I'll be honest, some of the most convincing illustrations of science's limitations is seeing the outright foolish claims that get made on some of the most elementary principles of life or even existence itself. It's some of the conclusions they draw where it's like, I am 100% convinced that the Bible is true, because if you believe that absurd thing, I don't trust anything you're saying. One of my memory verses for the kids in our family, Proverbs 9:10, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is insight. And when we cover that, I make a distinction between intelligence and wisdom for them. Because smart people can be profoundly unwise in their beliefs, all the while being brilliant. Brilliant men can discover great things, they can advance knowledge of the material world, but they are blind to the fact that the claims of modern science cannot explain the literal existence of a single atom, even the simplest thing. They have to deny. They're left with no ontology. They don't have a starting point for matter itself, the existence of anything. They're left without it. No ontology. They have no teleology. They can't say where this is going other than the eventual heat death of the universe when everything's just wiped out and dead and barren, which means that life has no purpose. They cannot give purpose or meaning to life in the naturalistic, materialistic worldview. They know that there is, but their assumptions lead them to the conclusion that there isn't. So they're conflicted. It's inherently nihilistic. And they can't face that demon because humans weren't meant to face the demon of meaninglessness and purposelessness in existence. They can't do it. So what do? They start sinking into utter depression, sometimes psychosis. And to avoid that, they become existentialists. They invent meaning so as to avoid this dark abyss of nihilistic, purposeless existence. I've given the illustration before. Imagine them wandering in a building that's dark, and they're opening doors and looking around, trying to discover stuff, and they open a door, and it's a monster. And they like, shut the door, and it's like, I can't face that. I'm going to go find somewhere else. And that's what they do with their worldview. They see nihilism as the only logical conclusion, and they see that monster like, ooh, that's ugly. I can't face that. You know what the meaning of life is? It's this or that. It's being really good at golf. It's getting as much attention as you can. It's hedonism. It's whatever. And it's invented. It's made up. It's arbitrary. That's existentialism. They can't not do it because they don't want to face the conclusions of naturalistic materialism. It also results in no basis for objective morals or ethics. They can't justify that either. Everything becomes relative. Like we said in the first talk on decisional regeneration, When they're not converted, they abandon scriptural authority, and therefore they abandon a basis of morality. It becomes morally relativistic. Everything becomes relative. Right and wrong is not only subjective, but it's constantly in a state of flux. It all depends on changing cultural taboos, on chronological and geographically determined mores. For instance, is slavery wrong? Depends on who you're asking. Depends on where they live and when they lived there. You're asking about America now, America later, talking about ancient Rome. There were slaves that owned slaves. Do you think just asking the slaves means they're all going to say slavery's wrong? Then why do they own slaves? Is eugenics wrong? Well, it depends. Who are you asking? Is killing Jews wrong? I don't know. You asking a German in 1941 or 1991? Chronologically determined. Are you asking a Palestinian Christian or a Palestinian Arab how they feel about Jews? Because if materialism and Darwinism and modern scientific claims are actually true, if they're right, then Hitler was right on many of his claims, and killing a bunch of Jews has the moral significance of wiping mud off of your shoes. It's just a different configuration of physical atoms. Eugenics would be right, because eugenics would aid the evolutionary process, and that evolutionary process is guiding us into higher levels of humanity, greater abilities. It's kind of like a shot, you get a shot, it hurts a little bit, but in the long run, it's better, right? Well, that's what eugenics is doing. It's like, well, let's kill off some of these mongoloids and these gypsies. Let's aid this process of evolution. Why not? It's perfectly in line with social Darwinism. Why not aid that process in bringing mankind into higher, more advanced forms of life? Kill off the mentally handicapped and the imbeciles. Get them out of the way. Stop the dummies from reproducing. They're messing up the genetic line. Imagine what we could be if we just let the best of the best breed. It's better for everybody in the long run. So just, get out of the way. Let's kill off the ugly people. What if everybody was beautiful? Wouldn't that be great? Yeah, they won't like it right now. But in the long run, that's better. For untold billions of people, they'll all be thankful that we did it now. It's going to hurt now. Nobody will like it now, but why not? Is it wrong to do that? Says who? And by what authority do they have to stop the advancement of the species? How dare they? Maybe they're the bigots. Maybe they're the ones standing in the way of science. Maybe it is that they don't like the inconvenient truths that modern science has proven. They don't like the conclusions. That's where science points us. Follow the science. Trust the science. In addition to that, the conclusions of modern science provide no epistemology. They can't tell us how we know what we know. It assumes empiricism, observing with our senses. It assumes that to be true. It can't tell us why our senses are trustworthy. We can. We know that God has designed us to use our senses to learn. They can't justify that. Nor can they provide a method of knowing in the realm where our senses don't operate, like the immaterial realm. When it comes to seeing the earth and its place in the universe, they attempt to give an explanation for the obvious design and creation. They can't get around that design argument. But those explanations fall woefully short, so they primarily stick to the biological realm there, because they cannot even begin to touch the truly impossible odds that we see in what's called the Goldilocks situation of our place in space, where Earth is and how life can even form there. And when I say impossible odds, I mean literally impossible odds. So, with all those deficits in knowledge, it's no wonder that naturalistic materialists say and believe very stupid things. I'm going to be straightforward with it. They so much love to trumpet their love of science. You've heard it from especially the most aggressive atheists. I know they're not all that way, but you hear it from them. And you know what? Those people are brilliant oftentimes. They're brilliant. They're just not wise. Their presuppositions force them into absurdity. And we need to acknowledge that the things that they claim are absurdity. They are absurd. I think of all the scientists that can't tell you what a woman is. They're absurd. They don't know what a woman is. I think of men like Bill Nye, all his perspectives change based on political correctness. I think of the feigned depth of thought attempted by Neil deGrasse Tyson when he tries to explain the beauty or meaning of the universe. Somebody asks him, and he talks about this all the time. Like, what's the most beautiful thing that you've seen in science? And he likes to slow down his speech and kind of like draw you in. He adopts this emotional tone, and he says things like, the molecules that comprise our bodies are traceable to the crucibles of the centers of stars that manufactured those elements from lighter versions of themselves, and they exploded, and they enriched the universe with the chemistry of life. So we are all connected to each other. We're all connected to the earth and to the rest of the universe. These atoms, these molecules are in us because the universe is in us. We're not only figuratively, but we are literally stardust. Cue glitter. Oh, Neil deGrasse Tyson. You've made me feel so meaningful. Every time he communicates that concept, and he does it a lot, he clearly wants it to have this sentimental weight. He literally says it's one of the most important points. It's what makes us relevant, is what he says. He wants people to think it's meaningful. And I'm sure it might feel meaningful to a middle school girl who likes stars, who likes the idea of being stardust. What he doesn't say is those same elements, those same atoms that comprise us, that give us meaning, that connect us to each other and the universe, that give us so much meaning, they comprise rocks and termites and a pile of dog poop. The same stardust connects us all. You put them under a microscope, you're going to find oxygen and nitrogen and carbon in all of them. Stardust. But we're supposed to be impressed because those elements came from a big ball of gas that twinkles. Cool. I'm glad that his sentiments connect me to termites and piles of poop. Thank you, Neil deGrasse Tyson. Thank you. And you can tell what he's doing, though. He's looking for a replacement for being made in the image of God. He wants there to be meaning and purpose. He's an existentialist. Create it. Create meaning and purpose, because nihilism is too ugly of a monster to face. Make it up. Make up meaning. Pretend that stardust is good for some reason. When it's in us, not in the rocks and the termites. Pretend that it gives us significance in the universe. What gives our life meaning? He's trying to escape being made in the image of God. And he didn't even come up with this line of thinking. I think he picked it up from Lawrence Krauss. He's a really popular atheist, a theoretical physicist, a cosmologist. They don't talk about him anymore because of his sexual misconducts. Turns out he didn't have a moral compass. But when he speaks of those elements, he says something very similar. Listen to what he's trying to replace. They were created in the nuclear furnaces of stars, and the only way they could get into your body is if those stars were kind enough to explode. So forget Jesus. The stars died so you could be here today. Stars died for you guys. Maybe we should worship the stars. Maybe we should worship the creation instead of the creator. Where did God say that they do that? Oh yeah, Romans 1, when he said that evidence of his power was there in front of everybody. Again, you see what they're doing. They're trying to replace true religion. The claims of modern science that contradict biblical revelation, you need to think of them as the emperor with no clothes. They are so profoundly silly that no scientist, no one in that academia realm has the guts to deny them, because they're so stupid that no one can admit how stupid they are. Everyone is compelled to go along with the zeitgeist. going along just believing flat out stupid things. And I'm going to be harsh with my language here because of how stupid it is. The fear of the Lord is truly the beginning of wisdom, because without it, you can't even make a start in that right direction of wisdom. You can't even make a beginning. Many people have heard me cite R.C. Sproul on this point. Probably every few months I cite it. I just can't get away from it. It's so relevant to our modern day. He explains so vividly, it's in one of these books, he explains so vividly how materialists deny the most fundamental maximum of reason. Ex nihilo nihil fit. Ex nihilo nihil fit. Out of nothing, nothing comes. There's nothing that can create itself. If there is nothing, it can't become something. What isn't remains isn't. It can't become is. Yet, modern science has to affirm a universe that simply popped into existence from nothing. They have to. They know that matter and energy are not eternal. They know it. They know there was a beginning to the universe. In fact, modern science and genuine science and biblical revelation all agree that there was a beginning to the universe. There was a starting point. And some will try to escape this and they'll say, well, the universe has always existed. No, not even your science says that. In eternity past, all of the universe was supposedly once compacted into this infinitesimally small point of singularity with all energy and all mass compressed into a state of complete organization and stability. That's what was going on, and it was that way for eternity, and with nothing outside of it that even existed at all, right? Nothing outside of it existed, but then one random day, it blows up. That would have been the biggest black hole, even theoretically possible. The gravitational pull would have been nearly infinite. And yet, the very last thing it would have done is blow up, especially when stable. For eternity past, with nothing acting upon it? So apparently they just get to throw out the law of inertia. Things that are at rest stay at rest unless acted upon by an outside force. They don't believe there's an outside force because nothing else is. There is no outside force. Their own science refutes their claims. There always had to be something. There has to be an uncaused cause. The law of causality also proves that. Every effect has to have a cause. And we say that and they raise this objection of the philosopher John Stuart Mill did this in the 19th century. Well, what caused God then? Well, brilliant question. This flimsy objection was enough to convince Bertrand Russell of atheism. He's one of the strongest atheists out there. I think he's dead now, but he always cited this. But we don't have to make an exception to get around these hard things. We don't have to make an exception to the natural physical laws, like the laws of causality or the law of inertia, the way that they do. This objection exposes the fact that they fundamentally don't even understand the law of causality. It's not that everything must have a cause, it's that every effect must have a cause. And God is not an effect. He has not been affected. There's nothing outside of him to act on him. He has no antecedent cause. Only things that are made are in effect. God is an eternal being. He is. Even from eternity, he is. He is existence itself. He is the unmoved mover, the uncaused cause. He is by definition uncaused. To say God is to say uncaused. Saying he's uncaused is like saying a bachelor is an unmarried man. Well, that doesn't add anything to the word bachelor. That's what bachelor is. Or saying a triangle has three sides. That additional information doesn't add anything to the word triangle because that's what a triangle is. You're not adding info to that word by saying those things. And when you do that with God, saying God means uncaused, eternal. Therefore, it still stands. There never was a time when there was nothing because there was never a time without God. If ever there was a time when there was truly nothing, then all there would ever be now is nothing. Because ex nihilo nihil fit. Out of nothing, nothing comes. Nothing can do nothing. It cannot create itself, and it certainly cannot explode spontaneously into existence and become dinosaurs and baseball and apple pie. It cannot overcome the second law of thermodynamics. It can't go from chaos to order. An explosion going and creating order. Imagine the Mona Lisa being created by setting some dynamite amongst a bunch of buckets of paint from chaos to beautiful order. That's not how it works. Explosions don't construct things. They deconstruct things. Russia's not putting up new buildings and bringing order to Ukraine right now with missiles. They're deconstructing with their missiles. Matter exploding into the universe cannot arrange itself into everything that ever was or ever will be. If something is now, then something else always was. The fact that anything at all exists is 100% concrete evidence of God's existence. It is evident to them because God has made it evident to them because his glory and power are made and shown in creation. So if God is not, then the universe must have been self-generated, which means that according to their lack of wisdom, the universe had to be before it was. Because who created the universe? Well, the universe did. So the universe was before it was? It doesn't make any sense. It's the emperor with no clothes. It's profoundly absurd. Their necessary origin story, and I say that meaning they have to say this. They have to say this is true. It so flagrantly violates the most fundamental maxim of all reason and all science and all philosophy that it is a wonder that the first supposed genius that suggested such an idea was not laughed out of the room, laughed out of all academia. Like, that's the dumbest answer I've ever heard. That can't be in any field. It can't happen. It's the emperor with no clothes. It is idiocy. The academic world, in all of its wisdom, thrives on those absurdities. It has to uphold them. The supposed evolution of man from lower life forms, it's no different in terms of its respectability. Same level of absurdity. In both cases, the origins of the universe, the origins of biological life forms, it's simply the best that they can do without admitting the obvious and necessary evidence of the Creator God. Because if they admit what's in front of them, that puts a God in front of them. And a God must be submitted to and worshipped. And they don't want to do that, so they have to resort to absurdity. And if they're going to believe such blatant idiocy, then the truth of the cross is justly hidden from them. Everything we touch, everything we see, everything that is, proves that God is. You take a single atom out of the existence of the universe. One single atom exists, God exists. That's all it would take on Judgment Day. Look at an atom. Is it? It is. You're accountable to me, the Creator. He proves that he was before anything else was, and proves that he always will be. And I don't make those comments for the sake of being aggressive. I know I get worked up here. I'm not trying to insult the intelligence of unbelievers. I readily acknowledge their intelligence. I don't think it's an intellectual problem. It's a spiritual problem. I've said before, you will find idiot atheists and brilliant atheists, and you will find idiot Christians and brilliant Christians. It's not an intellectual problem, it's a spiritual problem. I do think it is unavoidable that we speak of the naivete and the idiocy that they display. The only question is going to be, how frank are we going to be about that when we talk about it? But like I said, they can be brilliant. They can be geniuses. They make great discoveries. They contribute to the enjoyment of all mankind. They experience common grace. But they cannot be wise. They can't even make a beginning of wisdom. They put their faith in science and scientists without understanding its fundamental limitations and even addressing these ultimate questions that are being asked and answered by the Christian faith. Science is good for what God designed it to do. It's to teach us to interact with the natural world and to know what to expect empirically. But it cannot teach us that we're guilty of breaking God's law. That's not a scientific conclusion. That's a spiritual conclusion based on revelation, believing what God has said. It can't teach us that atonement and merit are necessary to be justified with the God who created the universe. It cannot teach us that the gospel is true. Science can't do that. That Christ was born of a virgin, healed the blind and the lame, cleansed lepers, gave hearing to the deaf, and raised from the dead. It doesn't matter how much technology you have. You can't test the supernatural. All the most impressive microscopes and telescopes and periscopes and mass spectrometers and Geiger counters, CT scanners, MRI machines, they can't tell you that Jesus is Lord. Lordship is not physically measurable, but we can still know that Jesus is Lord because God has revealed it. We can believe him, believe what he has said. It is a fact, and it is outside of the realm of science. So keep science to the natural realm and look to God to know what is true beyond what we touch and what we see. Amen and amen.